Our world. It houses 8.7 million species, including 7.5 billion people, across 7 continents, 195 countries, and 510 million square kilometers. Earth is a diverse planet, ranging from the bustling metropolitan city to the serene countryside. However, in today's day and age, we've taken most of what we have for granted. The food we eat, the gas in the car we drive with, the clothes we wear. Everything always seems to be at our disposal. But have you ever stopped and wondered where the food you eat has come from? This is a byproduct of globalization, where international communities work together to create a functioning and harmonious world. Globalization began in the 19th century and has slowly but surely integrated itself into our economy, society, and culture, becoming an important role. It is an omnipresent force. We never see it firsthand, but in reality it's happening all around us. Currently, with tensions rising between nations, and nations currently as distant as possible, the next few years will be pivotal in deciding the magnitude of globalization's future presence. However, a few questions still remain. Is a globalized future necessarily a good thing? And what can we expect to see in the next few years? We see this to be the rise of globalization.
Globalization is the interaction between multiple different people from different companies, government, as well as different nations. This process is mainly driven by international trade and investment from different companies and countries for resources. People have been interacting in this process of globalization for years, as people in one country might not have the same resource as another country, so they have to interact with each other in trade. Experts studying the effects of globalization have stated that globalization has led to an increase in consumption of food items, both domestically and from foreign sources. As a result of this increase in food production, transport for these food items has also increased, which is a very negative impact on the environment. An example of this will be the amount of fuel which is consumed. Fuel sources for transportation at this moment is still heavily based on fossil fuels, which when burned are extremely bad for the environment due to carbon dioxide emissions. Transportation of goods, airplanes, boats, and etc. use non-renewable sources, for example gasoline, which is used for fuel transportation. The gases from the airline which are released have led the ozone layer of our own Earth apart from the increased rising of greenhouse gases. Industrial waste is also a negative, as products from ships are dumped into the ocean, which kill underwater animals and destroy their habitat with the harmful chemicals, causing the ocean to be polluted. Globalization and industrialization, there are chemicals that are used such as pesticides, petroleum oil products, which are used in soil, which result in harmful and poisonous plants. Waste from industrialization and globalization has caused damage to plants by having chemicals interfere with their natural process and growth, making more genetic plantations, which are commonly known as genetically modified foods. Globalization has also have an impact on our natural land, as for example, mountains are having to be cut through in order for a tunnel for trains or highways. People build over those natural land, and we are happy about our new innovations, but they have long-term effects on our environment. As for example, plastics can be found to be the most toxic pollution material, as plastic is a non-biodegradable material. Plastic is widely used in companies for packaging and keeping goods preserved that is being exported out to the world. This use of plastic has led to an increase in environmental pollution worldwide. The effects of globalization are irreversible. Due to the magnitude of the situation, many countries have put in environmental protection laws against globalization. These regulations are referred as environmental globalization. One example of a country which has put laws to protect the environment against globalization, as in 2020, Singapore released an Environmental Protection and Management Act, also known as EPMA, which is to control environmental pollution, waste, and any hazardous substances in Singapore, and to provide for the protection and management of the environment and resource conservation and for purposes connected therewith, which is quoted from the official act.
Cultural globalization is an invisible bond that unites us together through our history, clothing, beliefs, and values. The world uses social media, migration, or verbal communication to build a diverse environment in order for people to pick up habits from each other that can be integrated into their own routine while still preserving their own identity. Cultural globalization is possible in our world today because of migration. Migration is the movement of humans from place to place with the intentions of either permanently or temporarily moving there. By one person taking their language, clothing, or beliefs into another country, it has caused our perspective on the world to change. A very basic example of this is sports. Before, each country would have their own national sports that would only be played there, but now, through globalization, countries have been able to welcome all kinds of sports and have been able to host events such as the Olympics or the World Cup. This is a positive thing because it has allowed us to learn from each other. But is it always as positive, or are there negative aspects to it as well? A major reason why it is hard to come to a consensus on whether or not cultural globalization is good or bad is because of westernization. Westernization is when our country will adapt to the ideas and lifestyle of a Western country, for example the US or the UK. For instance, in India, due to globalization, foods like pizzas and burgers have been introduced, which are not traditional Indian food and were not seen in the country for a very long time. Although the companies being in India have received a good response from consumers, local vendors are quite upset. They notice that having these options have changed the preferences for food for people living there. A very common example is McDonald's. It has become one of the biggest fast food chains not only in India but worldwide. Statistics have shown that in the last 50 years, it has expanded to over 31,000 restaurants worldwide. Food is a key part of culture because it represents your national identity and allows you to teach people about the ingredients that are unique to your country. Another case of cultural globalization being shown as negative is that it's taken away the use of native languages, which is extremely detrimental for children. Statistics have shown that there are about 7,000 languages in our world, out of which 2,500 are coming very close to being extinct. Many countries believe that this is taking away their uniqueness and local identity. For example, in Lebanon, Syria, and Iraq, Sirani, which was a language spoken by Jesus, is now not commonly heard of anymore. Due to this, many of the written languages are also being affected, and they feel like they will lose their people to the Western countries. However, on the other hand, we cannot disregard the positive impacts of cultural globalization. Taking the same example of language that I used before, it is true that English is spoken widely across the world, but that is because English is a convenient mode of communication for everybody to understand one another. But even within countries, there are several different languages, and English has not taken over them. For example, in India, despite most people knowing how to speak, read, and write in English, many authors are still writing and selling books in their mother tongue, for example in Hindi. These books are still being bought heavily. This shows that even though English is spreading throughout the world and through different nations, the local languages are not languishing. This is the reason why in schools today it is compulsory to learn either one or two other languages except for English. Another example is the learning that we can get from each other. Through cultural globalization, we have all been introduced to so many new things that would have been completely unknown to us. For example, by creating jobs for each other in different parts of the world, we're giving each other the ability to talk about our values and beliefs. An example of this would be yoga. Yoga was originally founded in India, however through globalization, people were able to go and as jobs teach people about spirituality. Now, yoga has become a form that many people use for spiritual reasons or even just for fitness. This shows that by having cultural globalization, it has given us the ability to have jobs in different places so we can all teach each other new and interesting things. After discussing the two different sides to the arguments about cultural globalization, the debate on whether or not cultural globalization is good or not is very subjective. However, we believe that the advantages of cultural globalization outweigh the disadvantages. The reason why we believe this is because although we acknowledge that there are negative impacts that are brought by westernization, countries have been able to learn so much from each other and put it into their own life to enhance it, such as learning a new language or playing a new sport. If countries learn from each other and use it to enhance their culture, for example through language, it creates a balance between learning from others and preserving your own to create a hybrid culture, in which everyone is happy and open-minded, therefore making cultural globalization a positive thing.
Economic globalization refers to the increasing connections between world economies as a result of the growth of cross-border trade, service, capital trade, and the spread of technologies. This reflects the expansion and amicable integration of global markets and is an irreversible force for economic development worldwide. Economic globalization impacts businesses, organizations, and helps countries begin operating on an international scale. Economic trade has never been easier and is ever increasing due to economic globalization. Through economic globalization, economies of different nations all around the world are starting to merge, becoming integrated. This can be considered both beneficial and a limitation to the global economy. One way in which the global economy is integrated is through foreign direct investments, FDIs. An FDI is an investment made by a firm or individual in one country into businesses located in another country. An FDI can be made by anyone through the global stock markets. For example, if an investor in America sees an exciting business opportunity in India, they can invest through Sensex, the Indian stock exchange, to make a return. Another way in which the global economy is integrated is through cross-border trade. Cross-border trade is the transfer of goods or services between two countries. Trade can be tariffed, where a tax is applied, or nations can strike free trade deals with each other, which eliminates this. The main reason why we can't conclude that economic globalization is a good thing is because of the negative impacts FDIs can pose and contagion. A prominent example would be the 2008 global financial crisis. Global markets follow a cycle of boom and bust, and when the dot-com bubble bust happened in 2001, federal fund rates were dropped by 11% due to fear of recession. Due to low interest rates, subprime borrowers with no source of income or assets saw an opportunity to buy a house. Interest rates went to 1% in June 2003, with an increase of home loans, buyers, and prices following. Home loans were packaged into mortgage-backed securities, becoming an FDI commodity to global investors. However, once home ownership reached a saturation point, interest rates rose to 5.25%. Now, loans could no longer be paid for and borrowers began to default. As a result, subprime lenders filed for bankruptcy. Investors on the mortgage-backed securities, who now owned close to $1 trillion worth globally, started to lose their money. By October 2008, interest rates had to be slashed to 1% in order to fight off recession. Central banks worldwide followed as the recession had affected their economy as well. We then saw the National Economic Stabilization Act of 2008, which provided $700 billion to buy off distressed mortgage-backed securities. Governments around the world soon followed with their own aid packages. The global financial crisis is a prime example of how a globalized economy could severely fail. Once the FDIs and the dodgy subprime mortgages failed, global economies started to suffer. During this recession, America no longer had the money to produce tradable goods, which meant that nations who depended on American products were also affected. The crisis effectively cost America alone $648 billion due to a slower economic movement. This is known as contagion, another negative impact of economic globalization. Overall, through the global financial crisis, the world saw the downside of a globalized economy, that once one global investment fails, we see contagion and repercussions to economies all around the world. One of the main benefits of a globalized economy are FDIs. Many companies based in LEDCs never become worldwide as they are unable to generate capital to grow. However, with FDIs, once a business makes it onto any stock exchange, they are able to receive investments from all around the world. Through this, smaller companies in LEDCs can be given the same opportunity to grow as MEDCs. A 1999 study showed that for an FDI of $1 to an LEDC, there was a domestic investment profit of 50 cents. This shows that when given the opportunity and capital, LEDC companies have the same potential to grow as MEDC companies. Another advantage of economic globalization are free trade deals, which allows tariffless trade. These deals not only make it easier and cheaper for nations to trade, it also benefits LEDCs. MEDC companies will be inclined to outsource their technology and factories to LEDCs due to cheap labor. Low-skilled workers in LEDCs are given jobs as well as experience and infrastructure to technology. Goods can be sent back to MEDCs free of cost due to free trade agreements. As cost of production is less, goods can be sold to consumers for less as well. Although this can lead to unemployment and MEDCs as seen in the American Rust Belt, the feature of free trade benefits most parties. Overall, although the global financial crisis showed us what could go wrong, it was a very specific case. The positives of economic globalization simply outweigh the negatives, as through free trade deals, FDIs, and technology transfer, we can help support global economies while giving developing ones a chance to grow. Although another recession will be inevitable, through a more integrated global economy, we can stop it before it happens. We feel that in the future, a globalized economy will be inevitable, with nations investing in one another to create a steady economic development worldwide.
Now that we have talked about the different kinds of globalizations, including cultural, environmental, and economical, it is time to look at it as a whole. How has globalization impacted global interaction? There have been several arguments and discussions on whether or not the organizations that are associated with globalization are truly good. An example of a very crucial organization is the WTO. The WTO is a World Trade Organization in which if countries want their or another country's trade barriers to be lowered, they will appeal it to the World Trade Organization to get the final verdict. However, even though it has been argued that they're doing such a good job, there have been claims that the WTO supports and benefits the developed countries more than underdeveloped countries. For example, France, UK, and Germany, and it excludes countries such as China, India, and Brazil, which diminishes the global importance of the WTO. Additionally, it has been criticized for ignoring the environmental impacts that it's had. For example, allowing trade between countries that are ignoring all environmental restrictions and only caring about the increase in their GDP. People have complained that with so many natural disasters happening in today's generation, with an increased amount of pollution and global warming that already comes from factories, how could they ignore that factor? An example of this would be NAFTA. NAFTA, which is a North American free trade agreement, was done to remove the barriers for the exchange of goods and services, and it was signed by 3 countries, the United States, Canada, and Mexico. Since the labor cost in Mexico was much cheaper, the US sent all its work over there. However, due to the competitive pressure, Mexican agribusinesses would use more fertilizers and other chemicals, costing $36 billion per year in pollution. Rural farmers expanded into marginal land, resulting in deforestation at a rate of 630,000 hectares per year. However, despite all these criticisms, the WTO has been very helpful in bringing us all together. First of all, by the increased trade that is seen in our world today, it has been able to reduce poverty because it has given jobs to so many people. Due to this, the living standards have also increased, and most people are able to live a comfortable life. It is true that these jobs are not the most glamorous, but in the grand scheme of things, it has given people enough income to support themselves and their family. Secondly, it has been very helpful in providing peace throughout nations. Because all the trade goes through them, any problems that occur are dealt in a very civil and respectable manner, therefore making sure that there are no trade wars. Even though it is said that the WTO supports developed countries more than developing countries, the WTO does not discriminate between anyone. It gives developing countries a voice to stand up and negotiate to come to a collective agreement. And lastly, a very clear advantage of it is that it boosts economic growth in countries. For example, in this graph, you can see that the world exports as percentage of GDP have increased from 22% of the GDP in 1995, showing us that the WTO and trade has been very important in the global economy, therefore creating a better and a safer environment for everybody. Just like that, organizations like the World Bank and the United Nations have been able to bring countries together to make sure that no wars happen, but instead everyone lives an equal and happy life.
Despite the clear disadvantages in the environmental, cultural, and economic sectors, we believe that the benefits of a globalized future outweigh them and is a good thing. With a more integrated world, nations can share their cultures, invest in exciting businesses, acquire goods and services, as well as become a global citizen. We acknowledge the need for a more environmentally friendly way to trade, but we do hope to see a future world which is fueled and sustained by globalization.